Good evening and welcome to Mary Trump Live. I'm very happy to have all of you with me tonight on what I confess is a very dark day in America. But before we get to that, we do have some good news. President Biden has signed the Social Security Fairness Act into law. Check out this clip.
Look, by signing this bill, we're extending Social Security benefits for millions of teachers, nurses, and other public employees and their spouses and survivors. That means an estimated average of $360 per month increase. That's a big deal in middle-class households like the one I grew up in, many of you did, and for millions of Americans going forward. That's not all. Over 2.5 million Americans are going to receive a lump sum payment of thousands of dollars to make up for the shortfall in the benefits they should have gotten in 2024.
So, good news. The law increases average monthly benefits by $360. The payments are retroactive going back to December 23rd. This will really help, as President Biden says, this will really help working and middle-class American families. As he said, quote, Americans who have worked hard all their lives to make an honest living should be able to retire with economic security and dignity, unquote. This is happening, of course, on the eve of an incoming administration, that despite what you may or may not have heard, is determined to erode benefits for the American people, including Social Security, Medicare, by, first of all, calling these entitlement programs, which they are not. These are programs Americans pay into. This is money that belongs to American citizens. And the Republican Party wants to either minimize the benefits Americans receive or do away with them entirely because they want to cut taxes for the ultra wealthy and corporations. Hopefully, President Biden's law will last, but we have challenges ahead of us. And one of those I want to talk about in a second. But first, I would be very appreciative if you could please take a second to like this video, share it, subscribe to our channel. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're following the podcast, rate and give the podcast a 5-star review because it really helps other people find our content. All right. Well, let's get to the dark part of the day. Today was the certification of the Electoral College votes, which made official Donald Trump's victory in November. But that's not really what January 6th means to us, is it? Before January 6, 2021, most Americans either weren't aware or didn't really care what happened on January 6th, because this is a procedural, a ceremonial process, actually, in which the Vice President of the United States convenes both houses of Congress and makes it official that whoever was elected in November has received the appropriate amount of Electoral College votes and will be sworn in on January 20th. All of that changed, of course, on January 6th. And I want to talk about that more later. But first, as for the certification process itself, the fact that there was once again, for the first time since January 2021. Sorry, I keep wanting to say 2020. I don't know why. Maybe because I wish January 6, 2021 had never happened. But anyway, the first time since that dark day in 2021 that there was a peaceful transfer of power, because remember, that did not happen 4 years ago. So many people have been hailing today as some kind of great achievement, that once again, the certification of the Electoral College votes was held without incident. The process was conducted with dignity. And yeah, I mean, it's true. Vice President Kamala Harris had to preside over a session in which she had to announce her own loss to her opponent, because in November, Donald received 312 Electoral College votes to her 226. So look, I'm all for dignity. I'm all for civility. But the fact that this went off seamlessly, I think, was a way to overcorrect. I think Democrats, many of them at least, as much as Republicans, wanted this to seem like business as usual. But I think for many of us who did not feel represented today, it was really a grim reminder of just how far American democracy has fallen. I have a couple of reasons for thinking this. First of all, the event unfolded under extremely heavy, unusually heavy security, which we know was a direct consequence of what happened 4 years ago. Now, why was there heavy security? It's not because of what happened on January 6th. It's because we were preparing for the eventuality in which Vice President Kamala Harris won, in which case we would have needed extra security because we would have had to worry about whether or not Donald Trump was going to do in 2025 what he did in 2021. But because he won, and because the Democrats, sometimes rightly and sometimes wrongly, accept the results of an election, even when I would argue, for example, in 2016 or in 2000, they should not have, we don't solve our problems with violence. So there was literally nothing to worry about today. The Democrats were not going to incite an insurrection. The Democrats were not going to start a big lie to undermine Americans' faith in free and fair elections. The Democrats were not going to incite a mob to target members of Congress from both parties. The Democrats were not going to threaten the life of the vice president who simply was doing her job. So the heavy security to me is not a reminder that, we're just taking congressional security more seriously now. It was a reminder that there really is only one side to blame for all of this. And I confess, it was a little bit disheartening that there was no voice of protest raised today. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that the Democrats en masse should have intervened in any way. I have my own opinions about Donald Trump's legitimacy. I believe he was an illegitimate candidate and therefore could not possibly be a legitimate president. However, he won the popular vote. He won the electoral college vote. That's inarguable, at least for most people. However, he should not have been allowed to run in the first place because, according to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, anybody who engages in an insurrection against the United States of America is hereby disqualified from running for higher office. And that would or should include the presidency. Not one Democratic voice was raised to inform the American people of this. Not one Democratic voice spoke out to remind us that in 2 short weeks, an insurrectionist and a traitor to this country will be sworn in. So, despite the enhanced measures of security, we also were shadowed today by Donald's promise to pardon rioters, to pardon the people who wanted to hang Mike Pence, who pardoned the people who wanted to see representatives like Nancy Pelosi dead, pardon the people who attacked our Capitol police officers, pardon the people who are in some ways responsible for the deaths of at least 5 people that day. None, of course, more responsible than Donald Trump. So I think this is the one thing that made that even more stark was the fact that some Capitol police officers were in attendance today. I can only imagine how all of this has made them feel. Because, of course, it raises even further questions about holding the powerful accountable and whether or not there actually is justice in America. Mike Pence, the ineffectual former vice president, applauded the proceedings on Twitter, stating the following, quote, "The peaceful transfer of power is the hallmark of our democracy, and today members of both parties in the House and Senate, along with the vice president, certified the election of our new president and vice president without controversy or objection. I welcome the return of order and civility to these historic proceedings and offer my most sincere congratulations and prayers to President Donald J. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance on their election to lead this great nation," unquote. Thanks, Mike. First of all, they're not president, vice president yet. And secondly, way to ignore the role you yourself, Mike Pence, played in normalizing Donald Trump's dangerous rhetoric and behavior for years. And the idea that Mike Pence, of all people, could praise the peaceful transfer of power without mentioning, even in passing, the horrific violence that descended upon the Capitol while he was just doing his job shouldn't surprise us, but it should still shock us to our core. So we're in this really weird position where the Democrats continue to play by the rules, and we are facing an American democracy that is increasingly fragile because I have to be honest with you, it often feels like the one party that could actually fight for us and fight for democracy is refusing to do so. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer actually warned that efforts to whitewash January 6th as quote unquote patriotism threaten the truth and legacy of the nation's institutions. I agree, but it's not enough just to talk about it. Here's what Vice President Kamala Harris had to say.
Obviously a very important day, and it was about what should be the norm and what the American people should be able to take for granted, which is that one of the most important pillars of our democracy is that there will be a peaceful transfer of power. And today, I did what I have done my entire career, which is take seriously the oath that I have taken many times to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, which included today performing my constitutional duties to ensure that the people of America, the voters of America, will have their votes counted, that those votes matter, and that they will determine then the outcome of an election. I do believe very strongly that America's democracy is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. Every single person, their willingness to fight for and respect the importance of our democracy. Otherwise, it is very fragile, and it will not be able to withstand moments of crisis. And today, America's democracy stood. Madam Vice President.
Well, I can agree with much of that, but I have a couple of questions. Who's fighting exactly? That's one question. And my second question is this: how do we keep American democracy strong if we're handing the keys over to what was once the greatest democracy in world history over to a party that has elevated an insurrectionist, a traitor, a man who has betrayed his oath to the Constitution the first time around? I'll leave you guys to think about that. But I want to move on to Donald's continuing to demonstrate that he knows nothing about how the legislative process works. He knows nothing about the economy. He knows nothing about the inner workings of the House of Representatives and how difficult it is to get anything passed under the best of circumstances, but certainly under a circumstance in which the majority party has literally 4 votes more than the minority party in the House. He is pushing for, quote, one powerful bill, unquote, to fund his policies. Now, of course, what he means there is he wants an omnibus bill, which I don't know if you're aware, Republicans have long fought against. Republicans want each bill to say one thing. This bill, however, includes pretty much a cornucopia of Donald's agenda. It includes extending tax cuts for the very, 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 very wealthy. It includes tackling immigration reform and increasing funding for Border Patrol and ICE. All of this and more. I mean, it is indeed a big bill. Whether or not it's powerful, I think is up for discussion. So this is already sparking opposition within Republican ranks, particularly the the toddlers in the Freedom Caucus, who are never seem to be satisfied with anything. And Donald is actually wavering on whether or not to break his big, beautiful, powerful bill into smaller packages. And his shifting stance is actually causing division and confusion within the GOP. This is increasing the severity of the challenges Mike Johnson has already been facing. I mean, yeah, he got the speakership on one very extended vote, but it took a lot of arm twisting, and the fact that he got challenged at all is a very bad sign for his longevity as speaker in his second term. So he's trying to rally support for this reconciliation package again with that razor thin margin, and it's almost entirely certain that he's going to need Democratic support, which will make it harder for him to get the hardcore right wing of the Republicans. So the reconciliation strategy would bypass the need for Democrats, but it underscores the GOP infighting. New Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who replaced the not at all lamented Mitch McConnell, favors a two-step approach, but others want a quick passage to the bill. The big, beautiful, powerful, whatever bill that Donald wants risks delays. It risks the possibility of increased opposition. And Lindsey Graham, who actually made sense for a change, warned that trying to tie border security to tax cuts is, quote, playing Russian roulette with national security, unquote. Not that Donald cares. So the infighting complicates the bill's passage, the razor-thin House majority, and looming resignations threaten the majority entirely because they literally can afford to lose 2 seats at this point. And if you add to that the demand that Donald's making for not for the debt ceiling to be increased, but for the debt ceiling to be eliminated, they're looking at further fractures within the party. I mean, if you remember, one of the reasons Donald was so unsuccessful in inserting himself into the budget negotiations a month or so ago is because he was calling for the elimination of the debt ceiling, which the so-called fiscal hawks in the Republican side refuse to go along with. So the reconciliation process faces legal and procedural hurdles, including restrictions under the so-called Byrd Rule, which limits non-budgetary provisions and thereby forces Republicans to balance their ambitions with practicality, not a specialty among Republicans at all. Just remember, Republicans could have done this years ago, right? They could have taken up these measures. They could have started renaming their committees with the Orwellian names they've started giving them. The Ethics Committee is now the Conduct Committee or something, because God forbid Republicans have to stick to any kind of ethics. But, they're doing all of this now because they want to get as much of this totalitarian stuff in place until Donald gets inaugurated. Part of what's happening here is that Donald is making people like Johnson pay because Johnson must now know that he is beholden to Donald Trump. or at least Donald thinks he is, because Donald will take credit for getting Johnson reelected as Speaker of the House. So it's going to be interesting, and by which I say we're going to be hanging on by our fingernails, but we'll keep you posted to see how all of this continues to unfold. Actually, we had some more good news today. The just despicable Rudolph Giuliani was finally, why does it take so long for rich white men in this country to be held accountable for anything? He was finally held in contempt when you or I would have been held in contempt 2 years ago. A federal judge held him in contempt for failing to comply with court orders in the defamation case that was brought, it seems like decades ago, by Georgia election workers Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. If you'll remember, the judgment Giuliani is supposed to be paying is $143 million. The judge accused Giuliani of intentionally stalling payment to the women, and he dismissed Giuliani's excuses as self-serving. Also, I would say just complete and utter lies. Giuliani actually did admit to withholding some assets, including his grandfather's pocket watch. I'm guessing that's not going to make up a huge percentage of the $143 million, unless it's a much nicer watch than I can imagine it would be. And other things, despite the courts ordering him to turn them over. So this contempt ruling is actually going to further limit Giuliani's defense at an upcoming trial, which will jeopardize his efforts to retain his Florida condo. The only question I have about this, besides why did it take so long, is why is he not in prison? I don't, seriously. I cannot tell you how many times this man has ignored judges. Judges don't like to be ignored. Judges like to have their orders followed to the letter. And yet, Rudolph Giuliani roams free. He still has homes to live in. He still has a pocket watch. Anyway, better a pocket watch. I think Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman would be better off with a pocket watch than that hideous pinky ring Giuliani has. But they can always, hawk it. Anyway, whether or not Giuliani goes to prison, what's of much more interest to me is that Shay and Ruby get their money. Finally, as mentioned, as you all know, this is the 4th anniversary of January 6, 2021. The first year in American history in which there was not a peaceful transfer of power. The first election in American history in which the losing candidate claimed that he had won. In which the losing candidate was so incapable of a mature acceptance of the results of the election that he started the so-called big lie and whipped his base into such a frenzy of grievance that he was able to instruct them to attack our Capitol on January 6th in order to interfere with the certification of the Electoral College votes. And the only way they could do that, of course, was to commit violence against Capitol police officers and against the representatives in the House and their staff members and their families. It remains a great mystery to me that was not the end of Donald Trump's political career, or that was not the end of his freedom. But here we are, having failed miserably as a nation, as people who believe in democracy. I think every day that goes by, history will judge Merrick Garland in a harsher and harsher light. This never, ever should have happened. We should not be sitting here 2 weeks out from a second Trump administration. So yeah, it's a dark day. I was hoping that every year on January 6th, we would reflect as a people about the fragility of our democracy and how we could make it stronger. But this year, with the election being over and democracy having lost, we have to reflect on how we could possibly, in our wildest nightmares, have allowed Donald Trump and the Republican Party one more chance to weaken American democracy even further. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining with me tonight for Mary Trump Live. Just a reminder, we will be back tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Time with the Nerds, and I will be back with my live show Wednesday and Friday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again. Have an amazing night. See you tomorrow.